Okay, what's up, y'all? I'm Dean Julius, the 7th grade English teacher here at St. Andrews, and welcome back to another episode of Parent-Teacher Conference, a podcast about popular and enduring topics in education from the perspectives of parents, teachers, and educators. In today's episode, Katie Hathcock, a cool parent and an awesome person, Meriwether Truckner, a 6th grade history teacher and an equally awesome person, and Hayden Archie, an 8th grade student, a volleyball player, and a basketball player, and a cheerleader. She does a lot. We're going to talk about classroom management and student behavior in class. Let's get started. I think if we could narrow it down to one misunderstood and underappreciated truth about teaching, it's that management in the classroom, sort of being the captain of a ship of 20-odd students, is probably the most challenging aspect about being a teacher. Could we all agree on that premise from the start?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yes.
Nice. And I read an article the other day in Edutopia by Ben Johnson that suggested that sort of self-care, building relationships, clear boundaries and rules, and then good parental communication are like the 4 foundational elements to building like a good classroom. So my first question for y'all is, what would you say from your various different perspectives, student, teacher, parent, are the right elements, the necessary elements for being a good manager in a class? Like, Hayden, from your perspective, perhaps, what made your best teaching or your best teacher experiences, what made those good teachers, and what management skills did they have that helped you?
The way that, like, if they were understanding and, like, coming from my point of view as a student, it would be better. Like, some teachers don't understand, like, being a student versus being the actual teacher. And so it's just better having an understanding and someone, like, you can work with. And with school, and then you have to, like, go to sleep on time and then take care of your, like, personal hygiene and everything.
Yeah.
And so the way I try to, like, do that is by, like, setting reminders for myself, like, on my phone, if I'm being honest, because sometimes I forget. And I try my best to, like...
And some of that is because I know that you're way more type A than I am. So that's obviously something I can't really change about myself. But you have a mastery of this balance between, like, good organization and also authoritativeness in your classroom, but also, like Hayden said, understanding your students and empathizing with them. Like, what are some strategies that you use as a teacher to maybe do what Hayden was just suggesting?
Yeah, I feel like, thank you, by the way, that is really sweet. I can't imagine, like, I would never have thought that someone would peg me as good at being classroom management. Like, that's kind of something that I wouldn't necessarily say was a strength of mine, so I appreciate that. That makes me feel better.
You're welcome.
I think that the most important thing is, like, setting expectations. I think that teachers, and, like, I'm a parent too, so I feel like a lot of my perspective comes from raising my 2 kids. I think that parents and teachers and just adults in general kind of expect kids to know what you want from them, but they don't actually tell them what you want from them. So I feel like in my class and at home with my kids, like, I'm a big, like, explainer of expectations. Everything that we do, this is what I expect from you. Like, this is, you know, in this activity, I want you to be talking to your neighbor, or in this activity, you need to be silently working. And I think just being clear and consistent with kids helps them know what to do, because I just don't think that they like aren't born knowing how they're supposed to act in my history class or in your English class. That's something that is a learned trait, and I think that sometimes we forget to teach them, like, and be clear about it.
I really, really appreciate that perspective and have learned so much. I know you outside of the St. Andrews setting as well, and I've learned so much in the way that you parent, because I think you're so right. It's laying some kind of expectation for kids helps them know, because we can't expect them to just know what we want out of them. So it is, I think, an excellent just starting point is tell them what you want. tell them what you expect, and then often they meet or exceed those expectations.
I really like that you called them expectations. I started this year obviously every year we have like classroom rules. But this year I thought to myself, like the notion of rules just seems punitive, or like it just didn't seem like the right word. And sometimes I think syntax really matters. So I just reframed it and I said, these are the expectations of my classroom. I expect you to listen and follow directions. I expect you to raise your hand. And I think that's really helped. I feel like you get more student buy-in when you just say, I expect you to do this. This isn't a rule per se. It's just, this is like the bare minimum.
And I think that it's true, like even, I teach history, but I feel like I'm kind of more interested in just like being a role model to kids and like teaching them how to be good humans. And I feel like even like little things, like for example, my son who's 5, like doesn't, when somebody says good morning, he doesn't necessarily say good morning back. Mm-hmm. And that's something that Katie thankfully was like my little assistant a couple years ago when William was 3, because we would come into camp together, to summer camp, and Katie would say good morning to William and he would just kind of look at her, and he gets really shy. Like that's why he's not saying it. But like I have used that as but when someone says good morning, you have to respond with good morning. And so Katie so sweetly practiced with William like every morning for an entire summer, and just let him like learn how to say good morning to somebody. Because even it's like the little things that, when we're in assembly and the kids don't clap after someone speaks, like that is a taught thing that we have to teach them. And like I just think that especially after being in a pandemic, like life, this social skills that we as adults know, like they aren't learning necessarily unless we explicitly teach them.
What about self-care? So, in Ben Johnson's article, he says one of the key ingredients for being a good manager, but also probably too, Hayden, for being a good student in a classroom, is taking care of yourself. Like, what does that look like? I feel like particularly after COVID, like that's got to be tough. We've all been trying to figure out how to take care of ourselves and do all the, milieu of things that we've been working on.
To me as a student, I think it's more about like time management, because the activities I have outside of school and with school, and then you have to like go to sleep on time and then take care of your like personal hygiene and everything.
Yeah.
And so the way I try to like do that is by like setting reminders for myself, like on my phone, if I'm being honest, because sometimes I forget. And I try my best to like, I don't know, just keep an open mind to what I have to do, and then still like have sense enough. I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it.
Yeah, have sense enough to get like all that stuff done. In, given that you have, like I just said at the start of the podcast, like you're in so many different extracurriculars. 7th grade is the first year that you really get involved in extracurriculars outside of school too. Was that tough, the transition of like going from 5th and 6th grade to just like kind of happy-go-lucky doing stuff to, I have cheer now after school and dance and all these other things?
It was actually like a really big change for me, because in 6th grade, the only thing I did was like select soccer out of school, and I would have practice like twice a week. And then the more homework you get every year and like the more stuff you had to do, and that was the first year we wrote any essays and stuff like that. So I think it was a major difference for me. So I actually had to learn how to time manage and try to make my grades not drop, but still do all the things that I wanted to do outside of school.
I can only imagine that COVID probably made that harder.
I think it's really important what you're talking about. Those, would you call them social emotional skills? Would you call them, anyway, I think that's so huge, Hayden. That's another thing that we just don't automatically know how to do is time management. And I think our phones, for instance, and all the distractions that we have these days can really, I think, hinder time management as an adult and as a student. So, congrats to you for getting that, and realizing that's that's a really important skill.
Yeah, we're all definitely learning that.
Yeah.
I think that these sort of things come up in the classroom all the time too. Like as a teacher, I feel like I'm just like constantly narrating to them like my feelings, which sounds like kind of weird, I guess. But like today, for example, I was like very nervous about this podcast. And so when they're like during morning meeting and we're talking about it, I would say like, I'm feeling really anxious about this. And they like can respond in that way. But I think that it's really important for kids to hear that like adults are having to work through some of their own like feelings and like time management stuff. Like when they're like, Miss Trugner, why haven't you graded those tests? And I'll say, well, my son's soccer game went until 7:30 last night. And then we had to do dinner and homework and baths and I didn't have time. And, you know, I think that it's really important for us to share our stories, I guess, with them. Like, I don't by any means pretend to be perfect. And I like gave up on that in the classroom like a long time ago. Like, I feel like I am who I am and I want them to see that.
I think, go ahead.
That was one of my favorite things about your class, because I remember we would walk in and you had like the magnets and you would put like a magnet on like a certain mood, and there was like these 4 categories. It was like sad, happy or something, and like all like different like adjectives that you would use like to describe how you're exactly feeling in that moment. It was actually really helpful to me, because also like 5th and 6th grade was a major difference because we also had more homework, because it like gets harder every year. So it really helped.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, that makes me so happy, because I feel like one of the things that I always say as a teacher just got validated in real time. Like I think that kids don't necessarily remember the history you taught them, but Hayden definitely remembers how you made her feel, and that to me means everything.
And to me as a parent, it means everything too.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I have to say, I grew up in a very different public school setting, and
Same.
you know, when you talk about punitive, you know, discipline and that type of thing, that's sort of where I am coming from. And it's such a comfort that education has changed in the time since I was in school to be more student focused, and I just really appreciate it. That's such a huge, you know, weight. I have an 8th grader and a 4th grader, and they, you know, the 4th grader is still in elementary school, and they're still very, you know, they have more than one teacher, but still very one teacher focused. And in 8th grade, you know, there's a whole lot of teachers whose expectations you have to manage. So it's different, but I think what's been consistent about their educational experience is that their teachers are empathetic and interested in how they're feeling and how they're doing in school, and that's really important.
It seems like there's a common thread here about empathy and sincerity from teachers, and that goes a long way to getting student buy-in. And if I remember correctly, a couple podcasts ago, Josh Brister and Dr. Rust and I all talked about that, like how when you level with a kid on a bad day, when you're, you know, things are getting really rough, it can really help. And I think back to times when I felt sick, like last year or 2 years ago, and I said, hey y'all, I don't feel good today. It would really be helpful if you could just empathize for a second and be on your best behavior today. And it always worked. And I rarely ever get sick, but like when you do, you really need that. Nice. Okay, let's see. Katie, this question is specifically for you, and it's about, you know, the importance of what Ben Johnson said, like parent-teacher communication. And he says that, like, in order to be a good manager, you have to have this good balance between speaking with parents. What does that look like? What does good parent-teacher communication look like tangibly?
I think that's a really good question. I think it can look lots of different ways, right, depending on the age and stage. I work with really young kids doing music classes, and I can, while I'm doing music with the little ones, I see the teachers snapping pictures or little videos, and they share that on an app called Seesaw. And as a parent of a kid that young, to see little snapshots of the day is super important, and just makes the parent feel so much more comfortable and have something to maybe ask their toddler about later, like, did you have music today? These are, things that really help from a parental perspective. I would say as they get older, like with my fourth grader, there are occasional emails. They might be to the whole class. They might be, individual. But it's just so nice to hear occasionally. It doesn't have to be a lot. And especially in the times of the COVID, I know that teachers have such a burden, just so much more to deal with than they ever have. So I think, again, the empathy from both the parents and the teachers comes into play. But, often, especially with my older child, often no news is good news in middle school.
Sure.
But any kind of interaction that we have is appreciated. It really is. I don't need snapshots throughout the day like I used to, but it's nice to hear about what's going on at school. Always. It's always nice to hear.
What about positive feedback, Meriwether? You're a parent as well, and I know something that we've been working on in the middle school this year is like trying to commend kids who are doing well. I feel like that's something that probably all of us maybe have lacked a little in our management practice. But I've tried it out this year. I've already sent a few commendations, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel good doing it. I hope the kids feel good when they get a little note from me that says, hey, you're a rock star.
Well, in my advisory this morning, a couple of them got little notes from their teachers, and they were all like, look what I got from my teacher.
That's
and they
awesome.
read it out loud, and I was like, okay, this is really cool. They're really excited about that. I think that it is so important, and we don't do that enough as we need to. And I'll be honest, like as an adult, I feel like I need people that are telling me that, like
for sure.
all the time. I would like to have people tell me, like, you're doing a good job with this, and
We all want a gold star.
Yes.
Everybody wants one.
And like I feel like a specific thing is really helpful. Like my daughter is in third grade, and she is so sweet, and she is so like lovely and sweet and everything. But like when she gets like a specific compliment, I feel like that is something that she can really like hang her hat on, And I think that we should strive to be really specific about things. And I think that it's easy, like when you know your students, and I feel like that, like as a teacher, one of my goals is like I want them. Like this sounds so middle school, but like I want them to like me, like I want them to like to be with me. Like I want them to want to come to my class, and like I'm not like trying to be their friend or anything, but like I want our time together to be special, like for both of us, and to be a place where they enjoy coming and they feel comfortable coming. And then when they do that, like it's easy for them to, like it's easy for me to find specifics because I know them.
Yep.
And they know it's meaningful because they know me.
Yeah, that's a good point and a good distinction. Like it's not necessarily about friendship. It's about like developing this sort of shared camaraderie between everybody in the room.
Well,
it's hard to do.
Sorry, Dean.
No, you're fine.
I would imagine that it's thinking back to like child development situations. It's catching them when they're doing something right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're getting, they're getting positive reinforcement, and also probably you're getting more buy-in from them because you noticed. I feel like it would help in your classroom management because they're feeling buoyed from the praise that they've gotten.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me like feel better about like the work that I'm doing, and like even like outside of school, and like in all like the curricular activities I do. Like you would always want your coach to be like, "Oh, good pass" or something like that. So it makes me like want to do better.
Mm-hmm.
Have you gotten any commendations yet?
This year?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
You're sleeping, 8th grade teachers. You're sleeping. Somebody give this kid a commendation. She deserves it. Okay, here's a tough one. What do you do when the poo hits the fan? Like, by that I mean when stuff gets tough in the classroom. Hayden, for you, that could look like, what do you do on your tough days when you know it's going to be hard for you to, not be disruptive? Or Katie, like as a parent, like when the kids are just being kids, or Meriwether both, like your kids at home, or school is just one of those days? Like, what are your strategies?
Well, I feel like for me, like, from a parent perspective, like, if one of my kids does something wrong, like one of my own, like, personal kids does something wrong, like, I don't, like, immediately write them off as bad children, you know? I'm like, oh my gosh, this was terrible that you drew on the wall, but, like, I still love you, and, like, we're going to fix this, and it's going to be fine. And I feel like I try to transfer that into the classroom. So, like, if I do have a student or a whole class of students who are, like, just being out of control, like, I feel like the default needs to be compassion. Mm-hmm. Like, they are out of control for a reason. Like, there is something going on with them. Like, they are not bad children. They are just, something's up. And I don't know, for me, I feel like always trying to think about, like, it in a form of compassion instead of, like, immediately wanting to, like, give everybody detentions and, like, rage and scream. But also, like, if things are really bad, like, I'm a firm believer of, like, a reset. Like, when my kids at home wake up and they are, like, grumpy and stuff, I send them back to their beds. And I'm like, we're going to start this day over. And then I come in, like, really silly, like, oh, my gosh, good morning. I'm so glad that you just woke up. And, like, pretend like we just started. And in the classroom, like, this happened yesterday. They came into my room like crazy people. And I sent everybody out. And I was like, we're going to start again. Like, we're going to start again. And you're going to come in like this is. And at the door, I was like, I expect you to walk into the room and be ready for class. So that means finding your desk. Like, again, like with the expectations.
That's a good one.
Like, I'm a firm believer of a reset.
I love that.
I bet Hayden remembers that from my room. Y'all go back outside. We're going to try this again. Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's a great idea. So as far as stuff hitting the fan, I feel like last year we had a couple of examples with my daughter of parent-teacher communication, one that went really well and one that went not as well. And the main difference was communication. It was an email. It was, a teacher sort of reaching out and saying, hey, I know this was a bad day for her, and so here's how I think we can fix it. And in the other case, there was just sort of radio silence. And I tell you, that email sort of outlining what happened and how we're going to fix it, I mean, I'm a fan of that teacher now forever.
Yeah.
Forever.
Well, I feel like break it, fix it. Like, we have been through responsive classroom training, which is very similar to positive parenting training, like, which I've kind of dabbled in both. But I feel like the break it, fix it mantra is the easiest thing. Like, I do that all the time. Like, oh, you drew on the wall. How are we going to fix it? Like, oh, you spilled your milk. Like, how do we fix it? Or like, oh, you hurt your friend's feelings at school. How do you fix it? Or like, oh, you disrupted class. What can you do to fix it? And I feel like that kind of like growth mindset way of disciplining, like, you really are disciplining in that you're like trying to teach them, but like you're trying to teach them how to do it better next time. Like, yeah, you messed up, we all do, so let's move forward so that next time you don't do that again.
Yeah.
And I think like the forward thinking is the best way to tackle those sort of situations.
Logical consequences. Hayden, what about you? What do you do on those tough days?
Usually on my tough days, I don't talk as much, if I'm being honest. I just try to like keep, like, I don't want my bad energy to like rub off on someone else. So I usually try to keep to myself or like talk to one other person, but I don't want to like make a big deal out of it or something like that.
That's fair. That seems like a pretty good active strategy. Well, I think the last thing I would ask is about, COVID, and I feel like it's impossible for me to not ask a question about it because it's still so pervasive, and especially in our state. Like, how has it changed at all the way you think about your classroom and how you navigate it? For example, Hayden, how has that changed your engagement in class? Obviously, last year being virtual for so much time, and the semester before that being exclusively at home basically the whole semester, like, surely that changed how you thought about school, treated school. Meriwether, like, obviously as a fellow teacher, like, we've had to relearn how to fly the plane. Can Katie, I'm sure that's made parenting, like, and Meriwether too, like, way more challenging.
It made it more difficult to like be attentive, and I think it was like a really big difference because obviously that hasn't happened in my generation before, like ever. That was like the first time where I had to like wear a mask wherever I go, and and pay attention to like how I'm talking to someone like 6 feet apart. Mm-hmm. Like it made like a really big difference in my life, and I couldn't do as many things. Like I remember the summer going in 7th grade, I stayed at home for like most of the summer because it was such a big deal and it just started. Mm-hmm. But now I think it's gotten a lot better, especially at school, and we do have kind of like a smaller environment in school and an outdoor campus versus like major like public schools, which I think is a lot better for COVID, obviously. But sometimes I wish it would just like go away.
Yeah.
Because it made it like a lot harder for me and like my family, and it just caused a lot more problems than I ever thought like that could happen to me or anyone else.
What about the workload element of it? Like going from, having homework in the afternoon to essentially being in front of your computer for 8 hours a day. What was that like?
For me, I would just like sit in my bed, and then as soon as I get to work, I would leave like the Google Meet and just go do my work. Mm-hmm. And then I wouldn't have any practices because everything got canceled. So I'd just be at home and like stuck in the house all day doing work.
Was that tough, like trying to be attentive? I say in air quotes because I know that really nobody was, probably, if I'm being honest. But like being attentive in a class for 45 minutes on a Google Meet?
Yeah. And then like if I wanted to talk to anyone, I would also have to use a screen because I couldn't go see them in person.
Sure. Everybody had their phone out on the side, like texting their friends, like, this meeting is so boring. Okay. All right. Truth confirmed. Well, what about the teaching aspect of it, the parenting aspect of it?
I feel like for me, like, predictability is always something that I've strived to be. I feel like I am, like, just, like, ridiculously predictable, like, but in a good way. And I feel like COVID has made me want to continue to be that way, like predictable and constant. And like in a world where you really don't know if like we were supposed to have a football game tomorrow, but it's canceled, we really don't know what is happening. I feel like there has to be some sort of, like for kids, I feel like they need to have some sort of constant. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's made me want to be that even more. And I feel like before COVID, I was interested in like having a classroom community and like setting up and social emotional learning, and I was interested in all of those stuff. But like after COVID, I feel like I'm like even more like this is way more important than me teaching you that Rome was founded in 753 BC. Like that sort of part of my classroom, I think, became much more important to me than the actual teaching part.
Someone asked me the other day about that, like, who was it? Was it you? Someone asked me, like, how do you, it was
yes,
you. You
yes.
asked me about, like, hey, I'm going to sacrifice some time in my class to like, read a book, but, like, convince me why I need to do that. And I think you just convinced yourself. The truth is, like, kids want community, and yes, like, I'm teaching sentence fragments and complete sentences and run-ons right now, but, like, they also just want to get along with each other and like build meaningful connections with each other, and that matters perhaps even more than sentence fragments and run-ons in the long run.
Right. I think so too.
So COVID like added on to like history. So last year, that's like the only thing we would talk about like related to every single topic.
To chime in from, I guess, just the home and parenting perspective, COVID, well, I think humans in general don't like uncertainty.
Sure.
And it's just brought uncertainty to every part of life. Mm-hmm. So one thing I've noticed is that, sort of piggybacking on what you were saying, Meriwether, is consistency, reliability, trying to be a constant in their lives has been important. Us trying to, eat together more often, make a safe space for them to talk about things that were hard, which sometimes they want to talk about and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just, need a break from it all. So I wouldn't, I don't know that there's any one way to get through it or to, advice to give, but I think it has made a difference for us to focus on what we can do at home to sort of make a safe space for their big feelings, because there's a lot of big feelings, for adults and kids, but trying to make a space for that has been something I've tried to do.
Adding to like the uncertainty, like when COVID was like major last year, more than it is now, you didn't know like who you were gonna see the next day, because not to be brutal, but they could like die if they had the disease. Mm-hmm. So that also added on to like stress for everybody, and like wearing their mask. And like I lost family members to COVID, and I know friends who lost family members to COVID, and I think that's probably why we talked about it so much last year, but it's also like really rough being like a child who has to deal with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, y'all, I don't want to end on a negative note, but I feel like this was great. I think this conversation was awesome. I'm really appreciative of y'all for coming on the podcast, especially Hayden for sacrificing her lunch time to come on over here. Air high fives for everybody.
Air high fives.
Good job, guys.
Yay.